On August 18, 1877, William Henry McCarty's life changed forever. At just 16 years old, he took the life of a blacksmith named Frank Cahill. Cahill, a large man with a reputation for bullying and picking fights, had often targeted the young, thin, and frail William. On that fateful day, after an exchange of insults, Cahill attacked William, pinning him to the ground and repeatedly slapping him. In the struggle, William managed to free one hand and grab Cahill's pistol. Acting in desperation, he shot Cahill in the gut. Fearing that he would be charged with murder, William fled the scene. From that moment on, his life became even more perilous, and he would eventually become known to the world as Billy the Kid. Years later, Billy drifted into Lincoln County, New Mexico, a place simmering with tension. Two rival factions, the Murphy-Dolan gang and an independent group led by John Tunstall and Alexander McSween, were locked in a bitter struggle for control of the county's economy. John Tunstall, an English rancher and businessman, hired Billy as a ranch hand. Tunstall quickly became a mentor and father figure to the wayward outlaw. For the first time in years, Billy had a sense of purpose and belonging. But Tunstall's attempts to challenge the Murphy-Dolan monopoly made him a target. On February 18, 1878, Tunstall was ambushed and murdered by Murphy's men. Billy was devastated by the loss of his friend and mentor, and vowed revenge. The murder of Tunstall ignited the Lincoln County War. Billy joined the Regulators, a vigilante group seeking justice for Tunstall's death. Over the next several months, the Regulators waged war against the Murphy-Dolan faction. The Regulators tracked down Tunstall's murderers, who were deputies Buck Morton, Dick Lloyd, and Frank Baker. They captured them and began to take them back to Lincoln to hand them over to the law for justice. However, on the trip back, the Regulators murdered all three of them. But this would not be the end of their revenge. The sheriff of Lincoln, William Brady, sought to put an end to the Regulators' vengeance. He was also on the side of the Murphy-Dolan faction. But the Regulators ambushed Brady and some deputies, killing them all. Angered by these murders, James Dolan hired a professional bounty hunter and former Texas Ranger named Andrew Buckshot Roberts to hunt the Regulators down and kill them. The Regulators and Buckshot Roberts would have a showdown on April 4, 1878 at Blazer's Mill. The shootout began when Billy the Kid and the Regulators stopped at Blazer's Mill to rest and eat. But to their surprise, Buckshot Roberts was also at the mill. When the Regulators spotted Roberts, they confronted him. The group, led by Dick Brewer, demanded that Roberts surrender. Roberts refused. The confrontation quickly escalated into a violent gunfight. Roberts, armed with a Winchester rifle, took cover inside a building and began firing at the Regulators. His sharpshooting skills allowed him to hold off the group for hours, wounding several of the Regulators. Eventually, Dick Brewer, the Regulators' leader, attempted to move into a better position. Roberts fired a single fatal shot, killing Brewer instantly. This marked a significant blow to the Regulators, as Brewer had been one of the group's primary leaders and a close ally of John Tunstall. Despite his injuries, Roberts continued to fight on, even as he sustained multiple gunshot wounds. Finally, severely wounded and unable to continue, Roberts died. Though the Regulators achieved a victory by eliminating a key adversary, the cost was high. The death of Dick Brewer left a leadership vacuum within the group, and the violence at Blazer's Mill only intensified the animosity between the warring factions, propelling the Lincoln County War toward even bloodier confrontations. A week later, the Regulators joined up with Alexander McSween and rode into Lincoln to confront Dolan. But the new sheriff, George Pepin, and his men were awaiting them. McSween and the Regulators barricaded themselves in his home. A shootout occurred, resulting in McSween and many of the Regulators being killed. Pepin's men set fire to the house, forcing Billy and a few others to escape. This would be the end of the Lincoln County War. But the pursuit of Billy the Kid was only beginning. After the events of the Lincoln County War, Billy the Kid was widely seen as an outlaw. However, among the Native American and Mexican populations, he was often viewed as a soldier against injustice, a symbol of resistance in a lawless and corrupt land. By 1879, New Mexico had a new governor, Lew Wallace. Wallace, seeking to restore order to the region, offered Billy an executive pardon in exchange for turning himself in and testifying before a jury. Billy agreed and met with the governor, turning himself over to authorities. However, the district attorney, who owed his allegiance to James Dolan, the winner of the Lincoln County War, had other plans. Despite Wallace's assurances, the attorney charged Billy with murder and had him jailed. Frustrated and betrayed, Billy wrote letters to Governor Wallace, pleading for the promised pardon. But his appeals went unanswered. Realizing that his life was in danger, Billy made a daring escape from jail and fled to Fort Sumner. In Fort Sumner, Billy found refuge among the local Mexican and Native American communities. There, he was welcomed as a friend and protector, a young man whose charm and bravery captivated those around him. But Billy wouldn't stay out of trouble. He began rustling cattle and picking fights with cowboys, further cementing his reputation as an outlaw. One notable incident occurred in 1880 during a meeting Billy was having with friends. A cowboy named Joe Grant interrupted their gathering. At some point, Billy noticed that Grant had taken a pistol from one of his friends. Sensing trouble, Billy decided to confront him. Feigning interest, Billy asked Grant if he could see the pistol, pretending to admire it. Grant handed it over without suspicion. While examining the weapon, Billy discreetly emptied one chamber in the cylinder and rotated it so that the hammer would fall on an empty round. He then returned the gun to Grant. As the meeting ended and Billy prepared to leave, Grant suddenly drew the gun and attempted to fire at him. But the hammer fell on the empty chamber. Seeing his chance, Billy quickly drew his own weapon and shot Grant dead. Although many considered it a fair fight, the incident only added to Billy's notoriety, further darkening his already infamous reputation. Around this time, Lincoln County elected a new sheriff, Pat Garrett, a former buffalo hunter and cowboy. Garrett was also a former acquaintance of Billy the Kid. The two had met in Fort Sumner and had a cordial relationship. Garrett even referred to Billy as a brave man. However, upon being elected sheriff, Garrett vowed to capture Billy the Kid once and for all. After several failed attempts to apprehend him, Garrett deduced that Billy and what remained of the regulators would likely head to Fort Sumner. Anticipating this, Garrett and his deputies planned an ambush. When Billy and his group rode into town, Garrett and his men opened fire. In the chaos, Billy's close friend Tom O'Folliard was killed, though the rest of the group managed to escape. Determined to end Billy's run, Garrett continued the pursuit. He and his men eventually tracked Billy and his companions to a remote spot outside Stinking Springs. Remaining undetected, Garrett set up another ambush. During the confrontation, Charlie Beaudry, another close friend of Billy's, was shot and killed by Garrett's men. Surrounded and outnumbered, Billy realized there was no way out that wouldn't lead to more bloodshed. Garrett promised that if Billy surrendered, no one else would be harmed. With no other options, Billy reluctantly agreed and turned himself over to Garrett. By January 1881, Billy the Kid was imprisoned in Mesilla, New Mexico, awaiting trial for the murder of Sheriff William Brady. Presiding over the trial was Judge Warren Bristol, a known friend of James Dolan. Unsurprisingly, the verdict was predetermined. Billy was found guilty and sentenced to be hanged by the neck until dead. Garrett personally escorted him back to Lincoln, where the execution was to take place. In Lincoln, Billy was confined in the courthouse under heavy guard. He was watched by two deputies, James Bell and Robert Pecos Bob Ollinger, and restrained by leg irons chained to the floor. Of the two, Ollinger tormented Billy, often taunting him with his double-barreled shotgun. On April 28, 1881, Ollinger left the courthouse to have lunch, leaving Bell in charge. Billy seized the opportunity. As part of his daily routine, he asked Bell for permission to use the outhouse. Bell unchained him from the floor and escorted him outside. Upon their return, as they climbed the stairs back to the courthouse, Billy made his move. He struck Bell and managed to wrestle away the deputy's gun. Bell attempted to flee, but Billy fired 2 shots, hoping to stop him. One of the bullets ricocheted off the wall, fatally striking Bell. With one guard down, Billy turned his attention to Ollinger's shotgun, which had been left behind in the courthouse. Hearing the gunshots, Ollinger rushed back to investigate. As he approached the courthouse, he looked up to see Billy at a window, holding his own shotgun. Before Ollinger could react, Billy fired, killing him instantly. With both guards dead, Billy freed himself. He unlocked his leg irons, gathered weapons and ammunition, and secured a horse. As he rode out of Lincoln, no one dared to stop him. Months passed with no sign of Billy the Kid. Sheriff Pat Garrett concluded that Billy had escaped to Mexico, where he could easily vanish. But that wasn't the case. Billy had returned to Fort Sumner, a place he considered home, and soon rumors of his presence began to circulate. On the night of July 14, 1881, Garrett and 2 deputies rode out to investigate. They had a mutual acquaintance in Fort Sumner named Pete Maxwell, and it was in Maxwell's house that Billy was staying. Garrett decided to confront Maxwell, hoping to confirm Billy's whereabouts. As Garrett waited in the darkened house, Billy unknowingly approached. He noticed 2 men outside, but didn't recognize them as Garrett's deputies. Curious and cautious, Billy stepped into the dimly lit room and asked Maxwell who the men were. Before Maxwell could respond, Billy spotted Garrett's shadowy figure in the corner of the room. Unsure of who it was, Billy asked in Spanish, "¿Quién es? ¿Quién es? Who is it? Who is it?" But no answer came. In that moment, Garrett drew his revolver and fired 2 shots. The first struck Billy in the chest, piercing his heart. The second shot wasn't necessary. Billy the Kid was dead. The sound of gunfire brought the locals rushing to the scene. When they learned that Billy was dead, emotions ran high. Men shook their fists at Garrett in anger, while women wept openly. To the people of Fort Sumner, Billy wasn't an outlaw but a beloved friend. Garrett allowed the locals to take Billy's body and give him the proper wake. The next morning, Billy was buried in the Fort Sumner Cemetery, laid to rest beside his close friends, Tom O'Folliard and Charlie Beaudry. Billy the Kid's death left behind a legacy shrouded in controversy. Was he truly a ruthless outlaw, or a young man driven by a desire for revenge after losing a friend who might have altered the course of his life? The answer remains part of the legend, a story of a boy who became an icon of the Wild West.